apologies for being a
Hello,
little
everybody.
bit late.
Good morning. Hello and welcome.
So
Hope
wanted
everybody had
to get the team
pleasant
together
travel.
just to go through the outstanding,
So, my name is
I guess we'll lump them into
I
just
currently work
set
for
issues.
Lucido, imaging
There's
marketing
a couple of
services.
things specifically for
will help try to
T365, and then
the
there's
power
things,
discussion.
outside of T365 that we want to chat about as well.
Currently, power is the
So I don't know, Adrian, if we wanted to start with you first, and Enterprise or Debbie Regis,
we all
get an update on where that's at. I believe is in Jason's
a
board.
lot
I
of
don't know if we need
challenges.
an
The business will
issue
say,
number for us
we're going to change the
specifically.
new ISO, and then the technical team and the systems teams is left to scratch our heads and say, well, how do we configure this? How do we make it work in the system? So today I have Jeff from with me, who I'll talk to. I have presented a list of topics for us to kind of openly and collaboratively talk about the challenges we kind of face, and how from an ETRM perspective we can kind of facilitate and accommodate for the business. So without further ado, I wanted to invite Jeff up here to introduce himself, and we have a quick presentation over Power Bit-to-Bill systems.
Thanks, Jack. Again, my name is Jeff Krzyzewski. I'm a technical lead at Lucido for the North America region. And today we decided I'm going to share a little bit about Bit-to-Bill integration with Allegro. So recently worked with Jack and the team at Mitsui on a big integration between Allegro and their Bit-to-Bill system. So we're just going to share kind of our experiences and what we learned from that. So the topics I'm going to cover are some reasons to integrate with your Bit-to-Bill system between Allegro, kind of what are the benefits and how it can help your business run more smoothly. All the different integration points that we built out, what data we had flowing into the system. Then I'll cover a few lessons learned. There were a couple things after the fact that we wish we could have done slightly differently. So we'll talk about that. And then finally, the overall benefits that we saw by building out this integration. So why integrate Bit-to-Bill with Allegro? Well, you can eliminate dual entry of all your trade data. So when you have your rewards, they come in every day, but you still need to get those into Allegro so you can have visibility into those and value them. And it could be a pretty manual process if you don't have an integration. So even here, if you have a partially automated process with an uploader, or some other type of tool, sometimes it could be missed or you forget about it, or it's just delayed and you don't have you don't have all the information you need when you need it. And it can also be a very error-prone process when it's manual. So particularly with energy schedules as one example, those need to be entered manually into the ISO eventually, and especially if you're doing any type of manual calculation or manipulation before you do that, there's a lot of opportunity for someone to key in some bad information, and that could have cascade effects on your business as you're doing analysis. Then finally, you can greatly enhance your ability to reconcile your settlement fees from the ISO. So without an integration, it can be very difficult to kind of track that and see that information in Allegro. It would be very manual and pretty tedious, and in this circumstance, there just really wasn't any reconciliation going on. It would be too difficult. But an integration
I can hear
make
and
that
see
actually
them.
much easier.
The one that says Og Day 1.
So what are all the things that we integrated, all the data?
Yes.
We had both
She said try
into
this one.
Allegro and then also outbound from Allegro to the Bit-to-Bill system. So bringing into Allegro, we brought in all the awards and auctions, the settlement fees, and then some meter data. And along with that meter data, we did have one weighted average calculation. And then one other thing I could add here that isn't on the slide is prices. So there could be some prices that you have in your Bit-to-Bill system, but you don't come through your regular price feed. So that's another potential point of integration that could be useful. And then going from Allegro to Bit-to-Bill, we sent the energy schedules that on a daily basis there. So for the awards and auctions, we created a single process that automatically imported all your energy bids, offers, point to points, and then your CRR obligations and CRR options. And those are all kind of different types of fields. So the data coming in from the bid to bill system all looked differently and had a different type of structure to it. But we were able to create a pretty simple unified mapping structure and configuration that was pretty intuitive and kind of the little work as possible and really minimize the amount of pains that needed to be set up. And so it was really kind of like a template almost, but for importing your trades. So that worked out really well. And then we also included some views to see kind of the staging data as it comes in. So you have some really good transparency between what could be potentially interfaced and then what actually happened to that data. So what trades were created. If they weren't created, they didn't get created, something went wrong, we really need to see kind of what happened so it could be resolved quickly. Next is the settlement fees. So to bring those into Allegro and kind of get them where they needed to be for the invoicing, we created, pre-configured some price indexes in the Allegro system. So we had one price index for fee description. So we went all the way down to the fee description level from the bid to bill system. And then those fees were populated on an existing trade, so for the fee detail. And so that really simplified the entire integration process for those settlement fees because you could just save them to the price value records for those price indexes and to just let Allegro do what it does best and just kind of bring those into the settlement and invoicing with little issue. There was one thing we had to do also to optimize that valuation because going all the way down to the fee description level, we had maybe like 20 to 40 records on that fee detail for those trades. So we did a little bit there to kind of make that process and reduce the amount of calculations that weren't necessary there. The next we integrated all the meter data. So rather than power schedule, track all different quantities, forecast, and actual. Another interface was pulling in the forecast volume and saving that into an hourly load shape. So that's how we can get the forecast volume to them as part of the visibility integration where we have all the actual meter data. We have those at the 15-minute interval level roll up to the hourly level, just so we run those forecast values on that load shape. So that was a pretty clean, straightforward way to get both forecasting and actual value. But as part of that, there was one specific asset that required a weighted average calculation. So the visibility system already had 15-minute interval prices in meter reads. So we did a weighted average calculation to get that on the hourly level to save that. And that had been a manual calculation that they were doing every single day. And, so that really was a nice thing to have. And then for the settlement fees, you know, for those, this is the energy schedule. So for the energy schedule, we only outbound integration from the bid to bill system. And to ultimately get those into the ISO, you need to have your qualified scheduling entities, so your queasies, but Allegro doesn't have a system to kind of store those out of the box. But we were able to leverage the power balancing views and columns and just kind of repurpose those and rename those. Kind of the data structure worked out perfectly to have set up and map your multiple queasies to counterparties. And then to actually get those energy schedules into the bid to bill system, the power scheduling screen was the kind of the best place to kick off that integration. So it was perfect because it brought in all your data at the hourly level you needed, and you could populate just a few custom columns, the required columns, and just send all of those to Allegro or to the bid to bill system. And then all that data, we aggregated it up at the queasy level and did a netting for your long and short positions. So rather than sending really detailed data to the bid to bill system, like 5 buys and 4 sells, we just kind of netted those and aggregate them so you could just send one line of data into the bid to bill system for your energy schedule. And there's one particular counterparty that had some specific rules that we couldn't do the netting on, so we made sure that we could enable or disable that based on the counterparty. And then we include the ability, an extra ability to export that data into a local file for any review, to make sure all the data is being pulled out that needs to be, do some double checking, get it in the right format. And then it also worked out nice as a workaround. If there's any part of the integration that went down, you could just manually import that file. So a few things we learned that we kind of wish we might have done a little bit differently. As far as error handling and troubleshooting, we could have done maybe just a little bit more verbose logging on all your requests and responses between the bid to bill system, particularly when you're working through issues with their technical support team. It's really good and it facilitates the communication with them if you have very detailed information on what exactly you're sending and what you're receiving back from them. So the more detail you can get, more technical detail you can get, the just faster those issues can get resolved. And then again, as I mentioned, the settlement fees performance, we didn't quite anticipate how intensive those valuations would be with all those fee detail records on those trades. So we did have to do some customization there to reduce and eliminate some of those calculations that we knew were going to be unnecessary. And then finally, some mapping flexibility. While we did have a pretty intuitive and straightforward configuration there to map all the awards and your trade data, we did have to go all the way down to the bid ID level because of some specific ways that the traders were, putting in the trades and wanted to see them in Allegro. But so if we could have had maybe like a wild card on that bid ID instead of having to duplicate all the different mappings for each specific bid ID. That is another thing we wish we could have done a little bit differently. And finally, some of the overall benefits to the business for building out this integration. So overall front office efficiency was greatly improved because we were able to achieve a single point of data entry for all your trade data. It's really nice when you can just submit your bids to your ISO, and then once they get awarded, they just automatically flow into Allegro with a very little delay there. And so that went a long way to eliminate some redundant tasks that the team was doing, and then just made the whole process much less error prone. We also had very much improved and enhanced visibility into all the trading operations and activity. So when you can get an integration that moves data between the two systems quickly and without delay, you just, no matter which system you're looking into, you have like complete and accurate information. And that's really beneficial to like eliminate some confusion and just help analysis and facilitate analysis there and make everything much more straightforward. And then finally, the back office reconciliation process was greatly improved as well. So as I mentioned before, just being able to get those settlement fees into Allegro and can configure those views in a way that you could just make reconciliation very streamlined and straightforward. And so that really helps to eliminate mistakes and get things accurate the first time. And so that's all I had planned here for this. Again, my name is Jeff Grzymkowski from Lucido. So if we have a few minutes for any questions or comments or anything anyone would like to share on their experience, we'd love to hear about it.
Are you able to share what it was?
Sorry, can you just repeat that question for the people online?
Yeah, so he asked if we could share who the bid to bill system is. I guess.
Hold on. I'm just curious, the section you mentioned about modeling all the settlement determinants with the ISO, is that what you were modeling in the trade and fee details that you talked about?
Sorry.
And you talked about the settlement determinants that you have to pay or get paid from the ISO. Is that what you talked about modeling as settlement fees?
Settlement fees, so all the fees from the ISO, yeah. that are associated with those. All the additional fees, not just the trade itself, but like the invoicing fees.
You said more of those under one single trade, or?
Yeah, like it was a trade,
So
to get those trades into, to get those fees to go through settlement, it was just a trade that didn't have any value on it, but it would still calculate fees, and so those fees would come through and be associated with the particular queasy that was doing the activity with the ISO, so you could still see those fees. Like,
okay, so yeah, it was kind of a mapping to the queasy that was awarded, and
yeah,
okay,
each
gotcha.
trade, yeah.
Just a sec, I'll come over with Mark. Thank you. Jeff, I have a question. So with all of the increase in data, and I know you guys rolled up the intervals to 15 minutes an hourly when you needed, but with all of that data, did you find any degradation of the system? And do you feel like in the future, as more and more data actually gets put into the database, that pricing data stays, do you foresee that the system will continue to, behave the way you expect it to?
Yeah, good question. I mean, this particular project, there was a lot of data, but it wasn't quite enough. It wasn't quite enough to really like strain Allegro, and so we've seen like Horizon has been much better about just handling like large amounts of data, but obviously you can't push it to the limit, and that's where like things like archiving does become like pretty important, particularly around prices.
That's a good question, because that's actually the very next point.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Durrani here. I have a question as well. We talked about using the load shapes for loading the forecast and then loading the actuals. Are you using the same load shapes and just overriding the volumes that are in there, or you're using one load shape for forecast and one for actuals?
Good question. Yeah, it was the same load shape because didn't think that we really needed to keep track of that history there, but you could still access it through the database audit if you really wanted to see like what the forecast was. But there wasn't any like detailed reporting requirements where to compare those forecasts to actuals or anything like that. So we just overrode it. That's it. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you very much, Jeff. I see they've made this mic for people that are over 6 feet, so I'm gonna tilt it down a little bit for people of my height. So this is Jack from Masui. Gonna try to follow Jennifer's footsteps and just blurt that out every time I stand up here. But super excited for everybody to be back in person. I'm sure we don't get many opportunities to collaboratively talk about what we kind of experience, and there's not a lot of ETRM support, especially on the corporate side. It's more always on the consulting. So super excited to see you guys, especially those of you on the technical side. Less of you on the functional side, but still very excited to see you. So we can create some discussions around topics. So before we start, I listed a list of topics that were kind of near and dear to my heart, but please feel free afterwards to raise your hand, speak up if there's any topics you want to talk about that you would like to have the forum, our collective knowledge set to discuss. And actually, this is great because from Quincy over there, I think I have one other person on that side talk about data frequency earlier. This is also something near and dear to our heart. So the first topic I wanted to open the forum to is actually that pricing granularity, because anyone that does power, most of us are probably in ERCOT since we're in Texas. As you venture to other ISOs, some companies do one, some do a bunch of ISOs, right? That's a lot of pricing data. So Allegro is able to handle it up to that 15-minute or maybe even 5-minute granularity, but I think most people are using it still at the hourly level, just doing some sort of a price average. So as data sizes grow, what do we collectively think is the best way to proceed forward? Whether it's that better archiving options to have things we can spin up as a backup database from we go, or do we just get some sort of a data lake on the IT side, or is it better to utilize some third-party software to handle that granular data and use it to model wherever we need to call upon it and keeping the data set outside of the system? So I wanted to, I think this is a topic that everyone is kind of interested in. So if anyone has anything to contribute, please feel free to raise your hands. We have mics back there that we can pass around. And to help facilitate, okay, please, over here.
Hello. So a couple things. I think a lot of people and groups just try and push all data into Allegro, and sometimes it gets overdone. So I think a lot of people use Yes Energy as far as like for power prices and stuff, and they're trying to move to this technology called Snowflake and stuff like that. And it's almost getting to the point where I don't want to bring the price into the ETRM if I'm going to use it in evaluation, and just not try to download all of Yes Energy into my ETRM. Like, if I can access it, yes, and the data scientists and analysts are savvy enough, just, it might be a little bit more work, but you have access to it already somewhere else. So moving it from point A to point B, if you're not using it in evaluation, I don't know. I don't think that works. Now, if you're talking about like Platts pricing, gas daily and stuff, like they're only going to leave that published for like 60 days. So if you want that history, like you got to store it somewhere. So that's what I think about that. And as far as like the 5-minute versus hourly, and you guys were talking about like weighted averages before, I think what we're going to do is we're just going to do a production weighted hourly price, and then load that back in and use that in our evaluation. Just because to make that's a lot easier. Less implementation, we don't have to remodel everything. So yeah, that's what I would say for power pricing, and not just using your ETRM as like a data lake necessarily if you have access to it somewhere else. So,
Another question?
No, in the comments sort of parallel to what Nick said, I would completely agree. And one of the ways that, because the downside to only housing it hourly in the ETRM, which I do think is the most efficient, is housing it hourly in Allegro if you can. But if you are in a market like SPP, where you're going to need that 5-minute granularity in your settlements to validate, particularly when you look back what your settlements are, I think this is where the integration to your bid-to-bill system, whether that's PCI, it's at 2, becomes very important, to where you have access to the source data, to where your settlements group can go back to, for example, PCI to look at the shadow settlement if they need to. So, I think that selection and the management of the visibility into the bid-to-bill becomes really important. But I agree that trying to make Allegro or whatever ETRM you're using as a replacement for that very granular data which should live in the bid-to-bill is probably going to, at the end of the day, it's going to overload Allegro if you're doing it at a larger scale. If you've got 1 or 2 plants and because we've seen different clients with different situations. If they
have 1 or 2 plants, you're only 1 or 2 nodes, if you're in multiple markets, this becomes a language.
I just completely agree. I think one of the
use custom pricing loaders to maybe write a C# program to directly hit the pricing value tables in Allegro to just write that pricing in there. Some of us use, say, either Inverse, Global View, or Morningstar, or whatever it is. When it concerns to power, there's thousands of nodes per ISO, and we're bringing in all that unnecessary data. It's like, it's good that one day we might use that price, and we won't have to bring it in again, and we won't miss that value in the valuation. But is it really necessary to bring all the prices for everything constantly into the system. So I think that was a great point. Anyone else?
I do want to say settlement is very important, especially, it doesn't matter if it's a gas site, coal, whatever, but especially in wind and solar, the volatility intra-hour, if you just take a straight hourly average of your price and your quantity, and you don't do that math, you can get big differences, you know, in that valuation. And then if you're going to build a report off of Allegro and, you know, you're off, you know, 20, 30 grand or whatever in an hour, like, that's annoying.
Completely agree. And not just that, if you're using, say, ICE prices versus nodal prices, then within the same 15-minute interval, you might have kind of a gap in your pricing. So when you're valuing, you know, that sometimes isn't the most accurate picture. All right, do we have anyone? Oh, over there.
David Allen, AES. I would say that we're doing kind of a hybrid. So in the US, in Bulgaria, those entities are all doing the weighted average type approach, getting everything to an hourly level. But in the South America business units, they're required to do their invoicing and have all that detail at the sub-hourly level. So we've done our testing on the price as well as all the settlement end-to-end process at the 15-minute intervals. And we're using the data and the pricing tables as stored as a JSON. And we didn't really notice much of a degradation in performance or anything doing that approach. So we have US on one and then South America on the other. So doing sub-hourly.
I was just interested to know what level of archiving was your company and most companies here use, because of course at any level you lower prices, it's all subjective, right? So a lot to one company may be a little to another. And at the end of the day, right, whatever you're putting into the system, at some level you do need to have some sort of archiving. And I think what we're focusing on, after 6 months we do just keep monthly data. And I don't know if that's something that most companies are doing, or is there another solution that people are using?
Yeah, that's a great call. And to that point, I actually want to kind of separate that into kind of two processes. When we talk about archival, especially business users, they only think about archival of the database data. But then from a support function, we think about archival technically as two separate processes. One, my database kind of restore our infrastructure if you own the server. What am I keeping in terms of my database? And the second is archival of the database size within Allegro. How much am I keeping on my production that's currently live? So maybe we can split those separately, and I can just quickly talk to kind of what we do. Obviously, we want to keep data granularity for at least up to 30 days, right? And then end of the month data for at least up to 24 months. And then you're only really at year-end data for indefinitely, and that's not going to take much space at all. So as long as you have those database refreshes, you keep everything. And then on your actual production database, what you can do is just trim your valuations for anything that falls within your current, whether you do a 7-day prod backup or 14-day or whatever. So just shrinking that database to a manageable size and then archiving it accordingly. I don't know if anyone else had any feedback to this topic. All right, if there's...
You mentioned you had a 24-month purge process. Can you tell me roughly the size of your database? So if you're working with a SQL database and you're keeping that lean and pristine, and you're moving over and you're archiving every night, valuation data doesn't big. I'm managing a 400 gig SQL server database just for archiving. And so my purge was hoping to be 2 years out, and I'm purging faster than that because of the sheer size.
So the question is, how do you manage the database size that's growing?
Purge process, what's the cutoff point? 2 years and indefinite size?
If you're talking about the production database purge, we actually, the archival purge. So we actually still do a lot of the older data on tape. So anything that's past 2 years, we tape it off indefinitely, so you always have access to it.
And we'll talk more about that in the technology section.
Yeah, and so I don't want to step on anyone. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Any other non-technology related questions? Alrighty, so moving on into rec management. So we kind of hinted at this already. Allegro is everybody tries to squeeze everything into Allegro, whether it's multiple commodities or multiple different businesses, options, valuations, etc. So what do we think? Do we use Allegro for rec management in the system, or do people like to keep it outside on spreadsheets and do the calculations or on different software? So what do we usually do for Power rec management?
Anyone in here use rec management?
Oh, okay, we have like people over there.
Yeah, I think, we are, first of all, we're for independent power producer, so we have our recs. It's easy to get your inventory when that's your position because your generation is your rec. You might be off one because of rounding, truncate, carry forward, all that stuff. But when you're, and this isn't a rec problem, this is, I think, every type of commodity problem is that with the recs, we don't really have any automation with it. So when the user's sitting there doing your recs, they have to go into the registries, make the transfers, do all this stuff. And after they do all that work and they want the flexibility of their spreadsheet and all that, then you want to ask them, oh yeah, by the way, this in Allegro too. It's just hard to, get the person to take the time to do that last step. So there, I think everything where it doesn't matter what commodity it is, it's the problem with Rex is going through the work, going and taking the time matching your buys and sells together physically. And especially if you want to include Rex in your P&L, a Rec is a yearly product, but the Rec was generated on a specific day. So you're talking about taking a yearly product that you sold and matching that to an inventory every day, and it just becomes a lot to manage. When I don't know, I like it. We're always going to have it in there, but the ability to not have automation and asking that person to match deals to supply or deals to offset your load or whatever, it just it just becomes the last thing on the list of things to do, and it doesn't always get done.
I think I saw another hand up over in that area.
Yeah.
Okay, they're too scared now.
Sorry, I can't help it. It's me, Nick. Because we've worked with the EP module quite a bit, and it does have its benefits. And one of the great benefits, just like Nick said, is the fact that if you're a power producer, if you're a green power producer, you automatically have your generation position, so you know how many recs you generated. That's already in the system. That's a great thing. But as he said, you don't have any hooks into any of the registries, which are quite a few, and they're just going to continue to proliferate. So if we had on the product some better hooks into the registries, it would really help. The second part, when it comes to matching positions, The inventory and the matching in the EP module is pretty aggregate, right? So it puts all of the recs into just an aggregate bucket by vintage and registry, right? So it lacks the necessary granularity to really tie out, especially when you're getting deliveries broken up across time from a particular trade or a particular project, right? So if you're getting off of X wind farm and you've got one trade that represents the generation for the wind farm across time, and you're getting deliveries from a certain vintage, from a certain registry across time, you can't really break that up and match those deliveries to sales within that trade, or it's just this big aggregate bucket, which makes it very clunky for the traders or for settlements to manage that position. And I think if, from a product development standpoint, Ryan, folks, if we could fix those two problems, it would make the product a lot better and easier to use. That's just from having worked with it, but just a
Great feedback. Alrighty, so moving on. I'm not sure how many people actually have the power scheduling module activated in Allegro. For those of us that don't or do, do we like how power scheduling is currently? Sorry, that's not the right word. Do we do power scheduling within Allegro, or do we try to utilize a bit to build to interact directly with the ISO? Do we have any preference to see either way or the other? So as we kind of ventured into ERCOT and other ISOs, one of the bigger challenges is trying to reconcile the volumes that the traders are supposed to kind of put on each of the different points and locations. And I don't know if anyone else has any issues with kind of reconciling that volumetric data per location on their power schedules, especially as it goes down to billing for any of our other counterparties. Looks like we're the only ones. Yeah, this is your section. I'm not up here to speak. This is not I'm a facilitator. We're getting our collective knowledge here.
Yeah, so it is something that we're doing in an external system at the moment. But I do think it would be something that we would like to eventually integrate within Allegro. So I know a lot of people do prefer to keep those things separate, especially commercial, because what works best for them may not be what works best for us. But rolling up that data or finding a way to integrate it just for kind of like having that one system of record, which is, for the company that I work for, an extremely important concept. Yeah, I would like to get to that place one day.
Gotcha. Gentleman over here.
I'll just say that we did a hybrid. We have some people who are scheduling directly in the system, but I would probably say 80+% of our stuff is either coming directly through interfaces or a file upload process where they upload Excel and we map all that into the system. And both the Excel upload and the direct connection come through, use the same common code. So we just have really one process to write everything into the power quantity table. And then that's also when the bid to bill system comes through, we take the actualized quantities from there and also send to that same process to load the quantities into power quantity as well.
We have a hand back there.
Yeah, this is Delali. I can just share how we're doing it at Emerald Energy. So we, I guess we're one of the pilots for ISO Connect. That didn't work very well. So what we're doing now is we have a bid to bill system that does the submission of the whatever they call it, and then we get all our settlements back into that system. But we want everything to be in Allegro for record. So what we do is we use load shifts to pull the settlement volumes and the prices back into Allegro. So that's done after the fact, after the settlement happens, just so we can have that record in Allegro. And we don't generate invoices or anything for the ISOs out of Allegro. It's just mainly to have the data in there, just so, you know, when we get our gas, now everything else is in the same system, but we do everything else outside. And so what we're trying to do is to better integrate so that we can get more real time, but that is our next challenge. But for now, we're getting what we need.
Thank you for that. Moving on to ISO fees, I think this was kind of brought up earlier. I think a gentleman back here asked, how do you guys do ISO settlement fees? I think Jeff already mentioned we just kind of aggregate it on a trade. But my question to the group collectively is, you know, do we map the ISO fees one-to-one basis? So I'm really talking about, do we say black start to a black start price index? Do we say non-spin, ancillary? Do we map every single one of them to a specific price point and kind of run that valuation process all the way through so we can match in settlements? Or do we aggregate it at some level to kind of reduce that strain on the system? Because one of the lessons learned, as we talked about earlier, right, is that performance aspect. If you think about a deal that's going out to 5-10 years as a placeholder, if you think about this list of 40 to 60 different fees that you're evaluating every single day at an hourly granularity onwards, it's a huge strain on the valuation engine. So what has other people done to kind of ease that effort, or do we aggregate? What is kind of the compliance for your processes to where we can make the system a little better and more efficient? And that actually leads off to another topic, so feel free to speak up as well, is do people still shadow settle anymore? Because at the end of the day, we're going to have to pay it. So whether or not you're able to dispute, you still have to pay it first. So do we shadow settle, or are we getting rid of that process, as I've heard from a couple of friends in other companies? My best friend over here in the green.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to choose, you know, just, yeah. Just from, I mean, I don't know, like moving the ISO data into Allegro as its own price and its own quantity and letting Allegro do that multiplication. But you're looking at, like, say, battery technology that only gets paid regulation, right? You're not even talking 5 minutes anymore on that calculation, like you were talking every 2 seconds, you know? So that type of time series and that multiplication is like, I don't know what the solution to that is. And, you know, if you're going to do your P&L and your performance on Allegro and you want the complete picture and it's 100% accurate, then you do have to move that into the ETRM. And especially if your ETRM is the only thing that's integrated with your GL system. But for us, you know, we kind of just ignore that piece, just leave it in our bill. Yeah, I don't know. If it's a big fee and we want our P&L to be close and accurate, we should move it. But yeah, with like battery storage too, you know, if you are going to truly shadow sell that, I don't know where you get the 2-second price data. And yeah, so some of the ISO stuff, ancillaries, it gets really hard to track and to shadow settle, and I don't know if anybody can even do it by hand. So, you know, I definitely see a need for you know, a solution. But if you're just moving the dollar amount over there, you know, just ask yourself why, and it might be necessary to do that.
So usually the business requirement comes from the settlements team when they try to match their invoices one-to-one to the fees, right? So if you have some sort of an aggregate function for the fees to bucket, then if they match, great. If they don't match at the high aggregate level, then the settlement team is going to have a very hard time to dig into the variance to see what caused the variance. So I think that's kind of the reason why we personally went with the one-to-one relationship, so they can take a look at the invoice and just line by line see exactly what's in our fin detail and just match it off. But then again, that creates kind of a strain on that system. And as you mentioned, once we go into battery, I don't even know what that will look like. So. Anyone else?
Switch mics. That one's coming through on the thing.
Yeah, specific point, right, when it comes to this idea of matching what's in Allegro for settlements, specific evaluation of settlements, against what you're getting from an associated maybe a bit to build. There are additional complexities around the cash flow schedule, so payment terms, certainly in certain ISOs, perhaps in their sort of favor, in which the payment that goes to ERCOT, for example, is on a quicker schedule, a day plus 2 schedule, whereas payments that you're getting from ERCOT are on a day plus 3. And what the book can handle that, Allegro doesn't, because now Allegro has a payment term in a trade, right? And that payment term is static. It's X number of days from how you set the payment term. And so one of the things that we've seen as we're working with settlement teams who want to have clarity around the schedules of cash flows is having to look at that and build customization about whether it's a payable or a receivable and changing the payment date so they can reconcile to the statement of what I'm paying tomorrow and what I'm getting paid the next day.
Thank you. Okay, so I just want to be mindful of the time. We only have 10 minutes left, so I do want to open up the floor for other topics as well. I just wanted to mention one more on the list, and that's as we get into different ISOs, does anyone else have issues around configuring different configuring for different time zones when you pull the prices and run the valuations, especially around daylight savings and holiday calendar is involved. And then do we have any issues around, the forward blocks, say like 5x16s, kind of valuing that monthly average at the 7x24 granularity instead of the 5x16. So these topics I wanted to throw out there to see if anyone had any input, and then afterwards we'll just go open floor. Any other concerns? I see Tiffany's pointing over there. All right, Tyler, you're getting called out.
So one of the issues we've kind of had with daylight savings and time zone switches is for one of our counterparties, we trade in MST, but they actually invoice us in NPT. So during the daylight time period, the last hour of the month actually needs to shift over to a different invoice. And we don't actually have a good way to handle that in the system. So does anyone else have a similar issue along those lines? Or, how do other people deal with that if they do run into that?
This is Delali again. This likely might be helpful to you, but we have this issue where we have said, okay, we only have this twice a year, so we're not going to worry about it. We're just putting a fee. We're just putting a fee to move on.
Yeah, no, I think that's good.
Yeah, I think our current solution is we actually break out that last hour into its own position row in trade detail. And that works for us, but it's, can be a little cumbersome to remember.
That's actually what we just had to do for one issue we have where it's a defect in Allegro that was the workaround that we came up with, was adding a new position row in to deal with that 1 hour. We also have an issue though, because in Chile, they have a set thing, there's, schedule going out into years and say that this is when the DST day is, and like a week before they move it. And they move it around every year, and so we always have to make an update through the back end to change the dates, because you can't change the date from the front end once there's stuff attached to it. So that's our other workaround.
That's actually an interesting point, because whenever we change things in the back end, which is sometimes unfortunately necessary, we have to go through kind of a change request process to make it audit kosher, and it's a very tiresome process. So great question. I also wanted to see, if it's other people changing things in the back end. Unfortunately, like we have to sometimes. Yeah. They're talking about it.
Permanent, but I don't know if they know when it's going to go into effect. I know like Tennessee and Florida have like fully had it passed. They're just waiting to like implement it. I don't know who decides when it like goes into effect, but this next one, we may not go off.
Oh, sorry. I don't want to say all that. I'm not a lawyer or anybody in government, but I believe that Tennessee and Florida, I know, have passed it permanently. They're just trying to work around like when they will make it fully permanent. But yeah, I just Googled it real quickly. The Senate did pass it back in March, so it may not be an issue this coming year.
Fingers crossed. I think we have another hand over there.
I was just gonna make a point too. You talked about like custom blocks and stuff. I guess that depends on where your assets sit, but a lot of our assets are KaiSo solar assets. So especially with the pricing around KaiSo, we're not able to use like the standard like peak and off peak blocks. What we've done, because like the 1x16, like Sundays and holidays price is so different than the overnight hours for off peak. We've done a lot of custom work with like TS periods, and so now we have on peak, off peak night, off peak weekend, and that allows us a lot more flexibility in our like price composites as well, because before we had this customization, we were essentially having to like duplicate all of our price records by 3. So that's kind of where we're going in terms of like disaggregating that off peak for nights and weekends.
Yeah, that's it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that as, the power market evolves, like people are just going to need to have more block structures. So like we do our FTRs in PJM, and they are audited through PJM or through Allegro for mark-to-market accounting and that. And if you have those types of positions, like now FTRs trade in 3 blocks. There's the week peak, the weekend peak, and then the 7x8 off peak. So all those random blocks and the super peak block, and it's just the day's going to come where we're all going to have those in, I think.
Yeah, as we're talking about pricing, especially once you get into settlements, you have your final prices and you have your true-up prices. So are we all just running our pricing polls, 90 days, however many days back to constantly get for pricing overrides? Or, what are we going to do for these 60-day, 90-day pricing corrections? This one, I'm sure we're not the only one running into problems with. Mike, over at the front.
Hello. So I told you that we're using Yes Energy and to import our day-ahead real-time prices. They have an adjustment on it. So it's a Python script that calls that API and looks for any adjustments, and then it just will find the adjustments, and then we load the prices through an Excel tool, and then those corrections will be made. But it's like, well, we don't even, like, that correction is just getting made, but nobody knows that it was getting made, or like, sees the adjustment or any of that stuff. So yeah, I don't know. It's a tough problem, and yeah, like, you know, through the pandemic and all that stuff, and, you know, turnover, and, you know, if you're watching PJM, like, you see them almost every week. Day ahead market's delayed, you know, pricing is delayed. So you're just seeing a lot more of this, and yeah, it's a very tough problem to do, to solve.
Thank you.
One other thing I would tell you, if you don't work with the South American countries, you're very lucky. We have an SAP interface, and in a lot of the stuff we do, we cache, in order for performance, we built a cache and things for FX rates. We've had to have it store the FX rates going back 4 years, because we will get changes from the ISO, and there's came up, we were doing 36 months, we had to bump it to 48 months of data in the cache, because they're making changes from 4 years ago. And those changes will be 1 penny, you know, not penny in price, netting to 1 penny in total value, and they have to have an invoice go through. We've had some of the adjustments will be 22 adjustments on an item, and the whole thing nets to 4 cents. It's crazy.
My condolences. Okay, we have 1 minute left. Just wanted to open the floor for any other topics that you really wanted to talk about, and unfortunately, sorry we didn't get to. Right there.
Yeah, so sorry, once again, I asked this question. It's not a pure power question, but it's a question that our power traders are concerned about. So everyone probably has this issue we have with gas. There's a shaping issue where, you know, gas prices are, you know, higher and lower in the short amounts kind of thing, but you hedge, let's say, the strip at a fixed price. So you take, you know, huge, so at some point you take huge losses at the point. So is there a way people are shaping this so that you spread your profit or losses equally over the duration of the strip, or, you know, people are just taking it as they can? I don't know if there's a valuation one, or it's a technology question, I'm not sure, but there's a power traders who are pushing it, so I ask why more power.
So I think it's more around the evaluation of seasonality and how we're capturing that to spread it either evenly or just taking the hit and taking the gain. Is that kosher, Tiffany? Okay, we have it's okay. Any input? I have pushback on your traders. That's a strategy we use very often.
We're just going to give you a microphone permanently.
All right, that's all. We're 1 minute past. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Lucido.
Okay. Before you guys leave, those of you that are here that are Allegro users, not our vendors, if you, again, still have a little tag that's in the back, please bring it over. You will want your name in the bucket. So if you haven't put it in here already, please do that.